The first thing I noticed when I stepped onto that porch was the light. It was on. The same porch light I had installed with my own hands 12 years earlier, the one with the brass fixture my daughter used to call the golden lantern. It was burning like someone still expected someone to come home. But when the door opened, it was not my daughter who answered. It was a woman I barely recognized. And standing behind her, in a stained apron 2 sizes too large, her eyes wide and her face pale with something that looked terrifyingly close to fear, was my daughter. She was 11 years old. She was holding a mop. And she looked at me the way a child looks at a ghost. Because to everyone in that house, to everyone in that family, to the lawyers and the courts and the county records office, I was supposed to be dead. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. If you walked through a door after 5 years and found your child living like a servant in the house you built, the house that was supposed to be hers, and you saw who put her there, what would you do first? Would you scream? Would you cry? Would you walk back out and call a lawyer? Or would you do what I did, which was stand completely still, look at every face in that room, and make sure they understood without a single word that the story they had been living inside was finished? Stay with me, because what happened in that house over the next 3 weeks changed everything. My name is Marcus Reid. I was 37 years old when I disappeared. I am 42 now. And for 5 years, 2 months, and 11 days, the people I called family told the world I was dead. They were wrong about a lot of things. They were most wrong about that. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the very beginning, not my childhood or my parents or the town I grew up in. I will take you to the part that matters. The part where everything I had built started being taken from me before I even knew it was happening. I grew up in Harlow County, a mid-sized city in the Southwest where the summers were long and the money moved slow unless you made it move yourself. I made it move, not because I had connections or a head start or wealthy parents. My father was a mechanic. My mother cleaned office buildings at night. What I had was a stubborn desire to never feel helpless again and a mind that never stopped running numbers. By the time I was 28, I had built a small construction and property development company called Reid Structural. It was not glamorous at first. We did foundation work, drainage contracts, small commercial builds. But I was disciplined and I was careful and I reinvested everything. By 32, Reid Structural had 17 employees and 3 active development projects. By 35, we had completed a mixed-use development on the east side of Harlow that the city council had called impossible. The building stood 8 stories, had retail on the ground floor, and sold out in 4 months. By 37, I owned the company outright, had no debt on it, and had just closed on a property that would become the centerpiece of everything. A 12-acre estate on the edge of Harlow County that I bought from a family trust for $2.1 million. The main house was old and needed full renovation. I spent 16 months rebuilding it, not flipping it, rebuilding it. I lived on site during the renovation. My daughter Amara spent every Saturday with me on that property, watching the old bones of the house get replaced with something strong. She was 6 when we bought it. She was almost 8 when we moved in. I called the estate Meridian House. It sat on a hill with a long gravel drive and a view of the county that on clear mornings made you feel like you were standing on something permanent. That was exactly what I wanted, permanent, stable, a place Amara could always come back to, a place that was hers. The house was valued at $4.3 million when we moved in. By the time I disappeared, it had been appraised at $7.9 million. The property alone had nearly doubled. The construction company was doing $11 million a year in revenue. None of that stopped what happened. I need to tell you about my family now, because they are the reason all of it went the way it did. My older brother Callum Reid was 41 when I disappeared. He was 3 years older than me and had spent most of his adult life being better at appearing successful than actually being successful. Callum had charm. He had the kind of handshake and the kind of laugh that made people trust him before they should. He had tried 3 businesses in 12 years. A landscaping company that folded, a bar and grill that lasted 18 months. A logistics startup that burned through investor money and closed without explanation. He came to work at Reid Structural when I was 30, and I paid him a fair salary to manage client relations. He was good at the relationship part, he was not good at the rest. My mother, Evelyn Reid, had moved into a house I purchased for her in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes from Meridian. I bought that house outright when I was 34. I paid for her car. I paid for her utilities. I had a housekeeper come twice a week. My mother accepted all of it and said very little about any of it except to remind me, whenever she could, that Callum was struggling and needed my help, and that I should be more generous with my brother, and that success without family is just loneliness with money. I heard that so often I stopped hearing it. There was also my aunt Renata Price, my mother's sister. Renata had never liked me. That was simply true and I had accepted it years ago. She thought I was arrogant for building something when Callum could not. She thought the estate was excessive. She thought I should have brought more people along with me when I succeeded. She was the one who usually put into words the things my mother felt but would not say directly. And then there was Diane Morrow, who had been my fiancée for 2 years when everything fell apart. Diane was intelligent and organized and very good at presenting a life that looked happy. We were supposed to get married the spring before I disappeared. The invitations had gone out. The venue was booked. Then 3 weeks before the wedding, I discovered that Diane had been sending money from a shared account we had opened for wedding expenses to a personal account in her name only. The amount was not enormous, $46,000 over 7 months, but the pattern was clear and what it said was worse than the amount. When I confronted her, she cried and explained and apologized in a way that sounded like she had rehearsed it. I called off the wedding. I moved her belongings out of Meridian House the following weekend. She did not disappear from the picture. She stayed close to my mother, she stayed close to Callum, she called them both regularly. I thought it was awkward and unnecessary, but I did not stop it. I was trying to keep the peace. I was good at that, too good at it for too long. 4 months after the broken engagement, I took a job that changed my life in ways I could never have predicted. A development firm based in Chile had reached out to Reid Structural about a consulting partnership for a large infrastructure project in the Atacama region. It was a significant contract, the kind that could open international work for my company in a serious way. I went to Chile to oversee the first phase of the project personally. My plan was to be there 6 months, maybe 8. I left Callum managing Reid Structural. I put a trusted attorney, Gordon Marsh, in charge of my legal affairs. I left Amara in the care of her mother, my ex-wife Lydia, who was responsible and present, and who I had a civil co-parenting relationship with. I want to be clear about this because it matters later. Amara was with her mother when I left. She was safe. She was in her school. She was living in a normal, stable situation with Lydia. What happened to change, that is something I will never fully forgive. 3 months into the Chile project, there was an accident. The construction site was in a remote highland area. A section of scaffolding collapsed during a storm. 2 workers were injured. I was on the platform above and fell 18 feet. The fall broke my left arm in 2 places, cracked 3 ribs, and caused a traumatic brain injury that kept me unconscious for 11 days. When I woke up, I was in a hospital in Santiago. My phone was gone, destroyed in the fall. The project firm's records listed me under a contracted name I had used for billing purposes, Marcus A. Reid, because of a clerical error made when the contract was first drawn up that I had never corrected. It was only 1 letter different, but it was enough. When the emergency contacts at the firm tried to reach my family, the name did not match. The calls did not connect to the right people. The firm sent a notification to the address on file, which was the Reid Structural office. By the time anyone at the company thought to escalate it, Callum had already made decisions that I was not there to stop. I was in the hospital in Santiago for 6 weeks. My recovery was slow. The brain injury affected my memory and my speech for months. I was moved to a rehabilitation facility. There was a gap of over 4 months during which the people in Harlow County who should have been looking for me were not looking for me, or more precisely, they had decided that looking was no longer necessary. Here is what happened on the other side of the ocean while I was learning to speak clearly again. My attorney Gordon Marsh received an inquiry from Callum Reid, asking about the process for declaring a person legally dead in cases of foreign accident or disappearance. Gordon told me later that he had raised concerns immediate. He told Callum that the process required time, due diligence, and genuine evidence of death. Callum produced a document. I do not know how he obtained it or who helped him, and that is something that will matter later in this story. But he produced a document that appeared to be an official record from a Chilean medical facility indicating that a worker named Marcus A. Reid had died of injuries sustained in a construction accident. The name was 1 letter off. The date was in the general window. The document looked official. Gordon Marsh did not verify it properly. He has told me since, with the kind of guilt that cannot be undone, that he should have done more, that he was rushed, that Callum pressed him hard, and that my mother wept in his office, and that he made a decision he should not have made. He filed a petition. A judge who did not know me, who saw a grieving family and a foreign death certificate, approved the petition. Marcus Reid was declared legally dead. And the moment that declaration was issued, everything I owned fell into the hands of the people I had left behind. I had a will. The will left Meridian House and a controlling share of Reid Structural to Amara, with a trust to be managed until she turned 25. Callum was named executor of the estate. That was the detail I had never revisited. I had named Callum executor years ago when we were still in a place where I trusted him fully. I had never updated it. Callum became executor of the estate of a man who was not dead. What he did with that position is the part of this story that makes my chest tighten even now. years later, even knowing how it ended. As executor, Callum had authority to manage estate assets during the transition period. He was supposed to be holding everything in trust for Amara. What he actually did was begin living in Meridian House within 6 weeks of the declaration. He moved in Diane, my former fiancée, who he had apparently been seeing for some time. My mother moved into the East Wing. Renata Price arrived 3 months later with 2 suitcases and stayed. They hired staff to manage the house. That was fine, that was appropriate. What was not appropriate was what happened with Amara. Lydia, Amara's mother, had been sick. She had a diagnosis I will not share the details of out of respect, but it was serious, and it required intensive treatment, and it limited her ability to care for Amara the way she had been doing. With me declared dead, Lydia had expected the estate to release funds from Amara's trust for Amara's care and schooling. What she received instead was a communication from Callum, through an attorney he had hired, saying that the trust was under review and that disbursements were on hold pending estate resolution. The money that should have been flowing to Amara's care was being held. Lydia was unwell and financially strained. Callum offered a solution. He offered to take Amara in at Meridian House so that she would be cared for and Lydia would have relief. Lydia said yes, she did not have many other choices. She trusted that Meridian was Amara's home, that Amara belonged there, that a child living in her father's house was safe. She did not know what was actually happening inside those walls. I found out in pieces, not all at once. The full picture did not reach me until much later, and each new piece of it was a different kind of wound. Here is what I eventually learned. Amara was not treated as a child living in her family's home. She was treated as an afterthought, then as a convenience, then as something closer to help. Diane ran the house. Diane was particular about cleanliness and order. Diane had ideas about what children should earn and how they should contribute to a household. Callum did not push back. My mother looked away. Renata said on more than one occasion that children needed structure and responsibility. Amara at age 9 was being sent to fold laundry. At 10, she was clearing dinner plates and scrubbing the kitchen after the staff's hours ended. By 11, she was doing tasks that the hired housekeeper had stopped doing because Diane had found it more convenient to hand them to the child who lived upstairs and who had no one advocating for her. Nobody hit her, nobody screamed at her. The harm was quieter than that. It was the harm of a child being made to feel that her presence needed to be earned, that her being there was a burden unless she made herself useful, that the house that was supposed to be hers was actually a place she had to work for. Amara stopped telling Lydia the details because Lydia was sick and Amara did not want to worry her. Amara was that kind of child. She had my instinct for keeping things from reaching other people. I do not know if that is a gift or a curse in a child. Looking at what it cost her, I believe it is a curse. While all of this was unfolding in Harlow County, I was recovering in Santiago. The rehabilitation was long and the process of rebuilding a sense of identity after a serious brain injury is not something anyone can rush. By month 4 of my recovery, I was speaking normally and my memory had largely returned, though there were still gaps. By month 5, I was well enough to start trying to piece together what had happened to my connection with home. The Chile project firm had long since moved on. My phone was gone. The email account I had used was tied to a server that had been changed. My attempts to reach Reid Structural went unanswered, which at the time I thought was a technical problem. I contacted the Chilean equivalent of a foreign assistance office to help me reach my attorney. When I finally reached Gordon Marsh by phone, his silence after I said my name told me everything before he found words. He said, Marcus, I need you to listen to me carefully. He told me what had been filed, what had been declared, what had been transferred. I sat in a chair in a hospital common room in Santiago and listened to my attorney explain that I had been declared dead for 8 months. I did not scream, I did not break anything. I sat and I listened, and when Gordon was finished I said, tell me exactly what Callum has done with the estate. Gordon told me it took 40 minutes. When he finished I said, I need you to start gathering everything, every document, every transfer, every action taken in my name since the declaration. I need the paper trail for all of it. Do not contact Callum, do not contact my mother, do not tell anyone I called, I will be home in 30 days. It took me 26. The return to Harlow County was not what I had imagined in the months of recovery when coming home felt like the thing that would fix everything. Because I had imagined walking in and my daughter running to me and the house smelling the way it did when I lived there. I had imagined a moment of pure relief. What I got was that porch light, and Amara in an apron, and a face full of the specific kind of fear that a child develops when they have learned that the world will not protect them unless they protect themselves first. I did not walk in loud, I walked in calm. The woman who had opened the door was one of the household staff, a young woman named Petra who I had never met. She stared at me with wide eyes. From inside the house, I heard Diane's voice asking who was at the door. I stepped inside. The entry hall of Meridian House still looked like the house I had built. The floors were the same reclaimed oak. The chandelier I had sourced from an estate sale in New Mexico was still hanging. The paint was different. There were new furniture choices that were not mine, but the bones were mine. The walls were mine. The foundation was mine. I walked toward Diane's voice. She was in the kitchen, standing at the island with a glass of wine and her phone. She looked up, and I watched the color leave her face in a way that I had never seen happen to anyone before. It was not a slow pale. It was immediate, like a switch. She said, "That's not possible." I said, "Hello, Diane." My mother came in from the hallway. She made a sound I will not try to describe. She grabbed the wall. Renata appeared behind her, looked at me, and went completely still in the way that guilty people go still when the thing they feared has arrived. Callum came in last. He had heard the voices. He came in fast the way he always did when he felt he needed to control a room. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Marcus." I said, "We need to talk, all of us. But first I want 5 minutes alone with my daughter." Nobody argued. Amara had already come to stand in the kitchen doorway. She had that apron on and her eyes were doing the thing they do when she is trying not to cry, that slight tightening at the corners that I know better than anything. I walked to her and I crouched down and I said her name, and that was when she stopped trying not to cry. I held her for a long time. Over her shoulder I could see the kitchen. There were dishes she had clearly been in the middle of washing. A mop was leaning against the far wall. A small pair of rubber gloves sat on the counter beside the sink, child-sized. I held my daughter, and I let what I was seeing land fully, and I made a promise to myself in that moment that I have kept every day since. I promised myself that I was done being the kind of man who kept the peace at the cost of the people he loved. The conversation that followed was not the screaming match you might expect. I have never been someone who leads with noise. The louder I feel, the quieter I get. And in that moment I was very, very loud on the inside. I sat at the head of the dining table, my chair, the one I had picked out. They sat around me like people who had been called to account and could not find a reason to refuse. I said, "I want to be clear about something before anyone speaks. I am alive. I have been alive the entire time." The declaration of death was based on a document that does not reflect reality, and I have already been in contact with an attorney who is currently preparing the legal process to reverse it. What has been done in my name in the past 17 months is a matter of legal record, and that record will be reviewed completely. Callum started talking. He said it was a mistake. He said he had done everything trying to protect my assets, trying to protect Amara, trying to hold things together in the absence of any information. He said the death certificate had come from an official source and he had no way of knowing it was wrong. I let him talk, I did not interrupt. When he was done I said, "What firm issued the certificate? Give me the name." He did not answer immediately. He said he would have to find it. I said, "You will find it because so will my attorney." Diane said nothing. She sat with her arms crossed and her eyes on the table. My mother was crying quietly. Renata looked at me with the expression of someone running calculations. I said, "I am going to ask one question about Amara, and I need a direct answer. Who decided that she would be responsible for household tasks?" There was silence. Then Diane said carefully that children benefit from responsibility, that it had been about structure, that nothing she had done was inappropriate. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "I appreciate you explaining how you see it. My attorney will also be noting how the estate's responsibilities toward Amara, as outlined in the original trust, were carried out during this period. That will be part of the record." That was the last time I spoke about it at the table, not because there was nothing else to say, because I knew that every word from that point forward needed to be in front of witnesses. The reversal of a legal death declaration is not a fast process, but it is a process that exists, and it moves faster when the person declared dead is standing in front of a judge. Gordon Marsh and I appeared in Harlow County Court 17 days after I returned. I had documentation from the Chilean hospital confirming my admission and treatment dates under my full name. I had records from the rehabilitation facility. I had a passport renewed at the Chilean consulate during my recovery. I had telephone logs showing calls I had placed from Santiago during the period I was supposedly deceased. The judge who heard our petition was a quiet woman named the Honorable Patricia Solano. She read everything. She asked questions. She looked at me across the bench with an expression that I could not quite name, and then she said, "Mr. Reid, I am satisfied that you are who you say you are and that this declaration was issued in error. The record will be corrected." She also noted that the manner in which the original petition was filed and expedited would be referred for review. That was the moment the situation shifted from a family problem into something with real legal weight. I moved back into Meridian House the day after the declaration was reversed. I moved Amara back to her room, her real room, the one I had painted blue at her request with a border of painted stars she and I had stenciled together when she was 7. I moved everyone else out. Callum asked for time. I gave him 2 weeks. Diane did not ask. She left 3 days after the reversal. My mother wept and said I was being cruel. I told her that I had purchased a home for her and it was still hers and she would want for nothing, but that Meridian was my home and Amara's home, and that was not something I was willing to negotiate. She called me cold. She called Callum later that day. I know because he told me about the call years later in a moment of something close to honesty. Renata said nothing to me directly. She packed and left inside the first week. The legal process that followed the reversal was substantial. I want to walk you through it not because the details are the point, but because the details are what justice actually looks like. It is not a single dramatic moment. It is a series of moments, each one returning something that was taken. The first thing returned was the business. Callum had taken a salary from Reid Structural for the 17 months as executor. He had also made 2 operational decisions that had cost the company money, one of which was a contract cancellation that resulted in a penalty fee paid to a client. The cost of those decisions was documented, and Callum was held financially responsible for the portion that fell outside the scope of legitimate executor duties. The second thing was the estate's property. The mortgage on Meridian had been refinanced during the period of my absence, with Callum acting in his executor capacity. The refinancing had pulled out equity. That transaction was flagged by my attorney as potentially improper given the nature of executor authority, and it became part of a civil action. The third thing, He one that took the longest was the death certificate itself. The document Callum had used to initiate the petition. Gordon Marsh's referral and the judge's notation triggered a review, and that review found that the document was a modified version of a real Chilean hospital record. Somebody had altered a name on an official document. That somebody was never conclusively proven in court. But the modification was real, and the investigation was real. And Callum spent money he did not have on attorneys trying to demonstrate that he had relied on a document he believed to be genuine. I will not tell you whether I believe he knew it was altered. I will tell you that I knew him well enough to know how hard he had always wanted what I had. And I will let you form your own conclusion. The civil proceedings took 14 months. At the end of them, Callum was required to return the equity pulled from the refinance, pay back the salary he had drawn as executor beyond what was legally appropriate, and compensate Reid Structural for the contract penalty his decision had caused. The total figure was substantial, more than he had. He sold the bar and grill he had opened with money from my estate's investment accounts during those 17 months. Yes, he had opened another bar with my money. The bar closed before the settlement was finalized. I do not think the timing was a coincidence. Amara. I need to spend time on Amara because she is not a footnote in this story. She is the reason the story matters to me more than any property or any legal outcome. When I came home, she was 11. She is 13 now. She is in a school she loves with teachers who know her name and parents who attend her events. I say parents because Lydia, after her treatment, is doing well. Lydia and I are not together and never will be, but we are exactly what we should have always been. 2 people who made a child together and who will spend the rest of their lives making sure that child knows she is safe. The months after my return were not smooth for Amara. She had spent 2 years in a house where her sense of worth was connected to her usefulness. That is a particular kind of damage. It does not go away when the person who caused it leaves. It lives in the child. It shows up in small ways, in how she asked permission for things she did not need permission for, in how she cleaned up after herself with a speed and thoroughness that was not normal, in how she would sometimes go very quiet and then look at me and ask if everything was okay. I got her a therapist. A good one, the kind who works with children specifically and who understood the particular dynamics of what Amara had been living inside. We went slowly. We still go. She is stronger than she was. She laughs more now. She argues with me about what shows we watch and what she wants for dinner and whether I am being too strict about her phone. And I treasure every single one of those arguments because a child who argues with you about normal things is a child who feels safe enough to push back. That is what I want for her, safety strong enough that she can push back. Let me tell you what happened with my mother, because that piece of the story is its own kind of complicated. Evelyn Reid stayed in the house I had bought for her. I did not take that away. I had promised her it was hers and I kept that promise because a promise is a promise regardless of what a person does, but our relationship changed. That is the honest way to say it. We talk, we see each other on holidays, she is not absent from Amara's life. But the closeness that I had always tried to build with her, the kind of closeness that I kept hoping would arrive if I just did enough, just gave enough, just stayed patient enough, I stopped hoping for that. I did not stop loving her, but I stopped waiting for her to see me the way I needed her to. And when I stopped waiting, something in me got lighter. She told me once, about 8 months after everything settled, that she had been scared. That when Callum had come to her with the death certificate and the plans for the estate, she had been in a kind of grief that made it hard to think clearly. She said she had not known Amara was being given household chores to that degree. She said she had thought the child was helping, not working. I listened to all of it. I said, I understand. I did understand. That was the complicated part. Understanding does not mean excusing. It means you can hold both things at once. I understand why you did what you did and it was still wrong, and the gap between those two truths is exactly where our relationship now lives. My mother has learned to live in that gap too. It is not comfortable, but it is honest. There is something I have not told you yet, something that arrived about a year after I came home. A piece of the story that changed how I understood the whole of it. A woman named Clara Voss contacted Gordon Marsh's office. Clara Voss was a records specialist who had worked for a medical documentation firm in Santiago. She had heard, through a professional network, that there was an American case involving a questioned Chilean death certificate. She reached out because she had her own knowledge of that document, not because she had created it, because she had seen it being discussed in an environment where it should not have been discussed at all. She could not identify specific individuals. The legal standard required more than she had. But what she described, a conversation she had overheard in a professional context between a records contractor and a man she described as an American in his early 40s who was asking about document modification procedures, was enough to keep the investigation open for another 8 months. That investigation closed without charges, but it did not close without consequences. Callum's professional reputation in Harlow County had already been damaged by the civil case. After the investigation became public record, the last business relationship he had been trying to build dissolved. He left Harlow County about 18 months after everything concluded. He moved to a city several hours away. I have not seen him since. I want to be honest about how I feel about that. There are people who will read this and expect me to say I wanted more for him, that I wish him well, that I hope he finds his way. Maybe I should feel those things. I have tried to find them in myself. What I actually feel is quieter than either hatred or forgiveness. I feel a kind of distance that is not anger. It is simply the fact that some people take too much and the only healthy response is to stop giving them access to take. Callum had access to me for years. He had access to my trust, my generosity, my willingness to bring him along, my patience with his failures, my money, my name, and ultimately my estate and my daughter. And with all of that access, the thing he chose to do was more. I removed his access, that is all. I removed it completely and permanently, and I do not lose sleep over it. The estate recovered. Reid structural recovered. I spent 6 months rebuilding client relationships that had drifted during the period of uncertainty, and an additional 4 months hiring 2 senior project managers who had been watching the company from the outside and who came in with ideas that pushed our revenue in the first full year past 14 million. Meridian House I did not sell. I renovated the east wing, the wing my mother had occupied, and turned it into a creative studio and working space for myself. I renovated the second floor guest rooms. I had the kitchen redesigned the way Amara and I had always talked about it, with a big central island and open shelves and a window seat where she does her homework on weekend mornings with a cup of hot cocoa and her feet tucked under her. I walk into that kitchen sometimes and I stop for a moment and I look at her sitting there, and I think about the girl in the apron with the rubber gloves. And I think about the fact that the same house can be a place of fear or a place of safety, depending entirely on whose hands hold the key. She holds the key now, I made sure of that. There is a question people ask me when I tell this story or parts of it in conversations where I choose to share it. They ask, how did you stay so calm? They mean during those first days back, during the dining table conversation, during the legal proceedings, during the months of undoing. The answer is that I was not calm the way a still lake is calm. I was calm the way deep water is calm. There was a great deal happening below the surface. But I had learned something during those months of recovery in Santiago, something the brain injury had actually clarified for me in a strange way. I had learned that the most powerful thing you can do with pain is witness it clearly without letting it control what you do next. Every decision I made when I came home, I made from that place. Not from anger, though I felt anger. Not from hurt, though I felt hurt. From a place of very clear, very precise knowledge of what had happened, what it meant, and what I intended to do about it. That is not calm, that is focus. And it is the most effective thing I have ever used in my life. I want to tell you about a night about 4 months after I came home. Amara was asleep. The house was quiet in the way a house gets quiet when it is finally yours again, when the sounds of it are familiar and safe rather than foreign and threatening. I was sitting on the porch, the one with the brass fixture, the golden lantern as Amara had always called it. I sat there for a long time, and I thought about the 5 years, not the bad parts. I thought about who I had been before I left for Chile. I thought about how hard I had worked to hold a version of family together that was not actually family the way I understood family to mean. I thought about how many E's I had covered for Callum. How many times I had written a check without keeping the receipt because that felt more generous. How many times I had let my mother's words about my duties to the family reshape my own sense of what I owed and to whom. I had given generously to people who saw my generosity as a resource rather than a relationship. And the painful clarity I had come to, sitting on that porch in the quiet, was that I had partly allowed it because I was afraid that if I gave less, I would be loved less. That the love I was receiving was conditional on my usefulness, and I had chosen to keep being useful rather than test that condition. The 5 years changed that. The 5 years and the hospital and the brain injury and the long recovery and the phone call to Gordon and the drive home and Amara in that apron. All of it together had burned away the part of me that was willing to trade self-respect for approval. I do not miss that part. I thought I would. I thought stepping back from that version of myself would feel like loss. It felt like relief. There is one more thing I want to tell you, because it happened and it is important and it completes the picture. 6 months after the civil case concluded, Diane Morrow contacted Gordon Marsh's office. She wanted to discuss the possibility of settling an outstanding claim she believed she had against the estate. She claimed that during her time at Meridian, she had made personal financial contributions to the upkeep of the property and that those contributions had not been acknowledged in the final accounting. The claim was 3 paragraphs. I read it once. Then I had Gordon send her a 4-sentence letter. The letter said that her time at Meridian House was not authorized by any owner of record, that no claim arising from unauthorized occupancy of the property would be entertained, and that any further communication on the subject should be directed to our legal team only. She did not write again. There is a particular kind of person who, after taking everything they could reach, decides that the one thing they are owed is an acknowledgement of their inconvenience. Diane was that kind of person. I had almost married her. I had almost built a life with her. And in the end, the clearest gift the broken engagement had given me was the ability to see her exactly as she was and respond to her exactly as that required. No anger, no drama, a 4-sentence letter and a closed door. Reid Structural is 15 years old now. It employs 23 people. We completed a major civic development project on the north side of Harlow County last year that the mayor called transformative. I was not there for the press conference. I sent my operations director. I had things to do at home. Amara had a school play. I did not miss the press conference. I went to the play. She played the narrator. She stood at the front of the stage and told the audience the story they needed to understand before the action began. She was clear and calm and her voice did not waver. Afterward, she found me in the crowd and I told her she was wonderful and she said, very seriously, I practiced the hard parts until they didn't feel hard anymore. I thought about that for a long time on the drive home. Meridian House is valued at $9.2 million now. Reid Structural is valued at roughly $22 million. Those numbers are not the point. The point is that none of it was enough to take. The people who tried to take it, using a death certificate, using a court declaration, using a child as labor, discovered that the foundation of what I built was stronger than their access to it. That is what I want you to hear, not the numbers, the foundation. Build something real, protect the people you love. Hold your ground when the people who should have held it with you choose the other side. And when someone tries to tell the world that you are gone, make sure you are the kind of person who shows back up. Not to punish, not to burn things down. To take your seat at the table that was always yours and to make sure your daughter knows that the house she was born to live in is safe and solid and hers. That is the ending I have. It is not a movie ending. It is better than that. It is the ending where you are sitting on your own porch, in your own light, listening to your daughter inside the house laughing at something on television, and you feel, for the first time in a very long time, like you are exactly where you are supposed to be. I am Marcus Reid. I was declared dead. I came home anyway. And if you think about the people in your life who have made you feel like you had to earn your right to exist in the space you built for yourself, I want you to know that your name on the deed means something. Your labor means something. Your presence means something. You do not have to disappear before the people around you admit that. You do not have to die to be remembered. You just have to stay. Live. Marcus Reid's story reached something in you today. I want to hear from you. Not about the property or the legal outcome, but about the quieter part of all this. Have you ever been in a situation where you kept giving, kept covering, kept staying patient, and realized too late that the people receiving all of that had stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as a resource? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because you are not alone in that. And sometimes just saying it out loud to people who understand is the beginning of everything.